My son raised his glass over a steak dinner and said, "To the new house." Then my daughter-in-law slid a mortgage folder beside my plate. "We already told the realtor you're co-signing," Jenna said. "It's just paperwork." The house had 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a 3-car garage, and a price just under $500,000. Ethan and Jenna had already made an offer, told the realtor my approximate salary, and described my nearly paid-off home as though my finances were part of their application. I was 53, a hospital maintenance manager, and 7 years away from the retirement I had spent 3 decades building. They hadn't asked whether I would place my credit and future behind their 30-year loan. They had simply turned my consent into one more document they expected to collect before Monday. I didn't shout. I closed the folder and asked, "What exactly did you tell the lender?" My son's smile disappeared. The next morning, the loan officer told me the truth. Ethan and Jenna had not been approved for that house. She had only discussed a hypothetical price range using the income they claimed I would contribute. If I signed, I could be held responsible for the entire mortgage, and no one could guarantee they would refinance me off in 2 years. They kept insisting I would never have to make a payment. Then I found a second budget in a blue folder they had accidentally left at my house. Under a column labeled Dad, they had assigned me $900 a month for the first year, $600 a month for the second, and every emergency repair until they could refinance. They hadn't merely promised my signature. They had already spent more than $17,000 of my future and planned to ask for it only after I was legally trapped. The dinner had never been a celebration. It was pressure served with steak, and they believed the seller's deadline would force me to swallow it. My son, Ethan, was 29. His wife, Jenna, was 28, and they had been married for 3 years. They both worked hard. Ethan supervised shipping at a building supply company, and Jenna handled scheduling for a dental group. They weren't irresponsible in the way people usually mean it. Their bills got paid. They went to work. They had saved some money, but they were impatient with anything that looked like a middle step. The house in the photograph had 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, stone around the front door, and a 3-car garage. It sat in a newer development outside Columbus, close to the schools Jenna liked. They didn't have children yet, but she had already pointed out which room would be a nursery and which would be an office. How much, I asked. Ethan named a price just under $500,000. I set down my fork. "And you've been approved for that?" "With you on the loan," Jenna said. There it was again. Not if. With. I opened the folder. The top page was a list of documents the loan officer wanted from me: 2 years of tax returns, recent pay stubs, bank statements, proof of retirement assets, permission to pull my credit. There was no completed loan agreement yet, but there was enough to tell me this wasn't ceremonial. They needed me as a co-borrower, so my income could help them qualify. "Did you give them my social security number?" I asked. "No," Ethan said quickly. "Of course not. They can't run anything until you authorize it." That answer relieved me slightly, but not much. "Then what did you tell them?" He looked toward Jenna. She answered, "That you make around $100,000 and that your house is nearly paid off. My salary with overtime sometimes crossed that line. My house had a small balance left. Neither fact was theirs to use in a sales conversation. We had to give Melissa something so she could show us the right range." Jenna added, "Melissa was their realtor. We didn't want to waste time looking at starter homes when we can afford something we'll stay in." "You can't afford this one," I said. "You need my income to qualify." Ethan leaned back. That's not the same thing as not affording it. To him, the distinction was real. They could make the payment if nothing went wrong, if both incomes kept rising, if they refinanced later, and if the extra expenses of a large house stayed conveniently small. My name was just the bridge between the life they had and the one they felt ready to claim. I understood the temptation. When I was 30, Ethan's mother and I bought a small ranch with orange carpet and a furnace older than our marriage. We spent years fixing it. By the time our divorce was final, I kept the house and most of its remaining debt while she moved to Arizona. Ethan remembered the finished kitchen and the shaded backyard. Not the winter we slept under extra blankets because the furnace replacement emptied our account. I had told him many times, "When you're ready to buy, I'll help." At that table, He treated those words like a blank check I had forgotten writing. "I'm willing to help," I said, "but I'm not agreeing to a mortgage tonight." Jenna's mouth tightened. "The seller accepted our offer this morning." I looked from her to Ethan. "You made an offer before financing was settled. It's contingent," Ethan said. "We have time. But the lender needs your documents by Monday." It was Thursday. They had arranged the dinner after making the offer, after telling the realtor, and after letting a loan officer calculate possibilities using an income I had never offered. The celebration wasn't for a decision we were making together. It was pressure dressed as a toast. I closed the folder. "Send me the loan officer's contact information. I'll speak to her myself." "So you'll do it?" Ethan asked. I said I'll speak to her. The drive home took 20 minutes. I remember sitting in my garage with the engine off and both hands still on the wheel. I could hear the old refrigerator in the corner cycle on. On the passenger seat was the folder Jenna had told me to take. I wasn't angry yet. Mostly, I was hurt. Ethan was my only child. After the divorce, our relationship had gone through a careful rebuilding. Sunday breakfasts, ball games, helping him move. I thought we had reached the point where he could ask me for something difficult and trust me enough to hear an honest answer. Instead, he had tried to make refusal embarrassing. The next morning, I called the loan officer, a woman named Priya Shah. I told her who I was and asked what information she had received. She chose her words carefully. "Your son represented that you were willing to apply as a non-occupant co-borrower. I explained that nothing could proceed without your application, consent, and documentation. Did you approve them based on my income?" "No. We discussed a possible range using unverified estimates. They have not received a loan commitment for that purchase price." That mattered. Ethan and Jenna had heard a scenario and repeated it as an approval. Priya explained the obligation in plain language. If I signed the note, I would be responsible for the entire debt, not just a symbolic portion. The payment would count against me if I later wanted a loan of my own. Late payments could damage my credit. Refinancing me off in 2 years would depend on their income, equity, credit, interest rates, and the lender's rules at that time. No one could promise it. I knew most of that already. Hearing it from the person holding the application removed the last bit of family fog around it. "Please note that I have not consented to apply," I said. "I will," she replied. She sounded neither surprised nor judgmental. That afternoon, Ethan called while I was walking through the mechanical room at the hospital where I worked. I waited until I was back in my office. "Priya says you told her not to process you," he said. I told her the truth. "I never agreed. You made it sound like we lied to her. You told her I was willing, because you always said you'd help me buy a house. Helping and owing $500,000 are not the same thing." He went quiet, then said, "Nobody's asking you to make the payments?" I believed that he believed it when he said it. "Send me your full monthly budget," I said. "Income, debts, projected payment, taxes, insurance, utilities, everything. If you want me involved financially, I get to see the numbers." He agreed, but without enthusiasm. That evening, Jenna sent me a spreadsheet. It showed their combined take-home pay, car loans, student debt, credit cards, groceries, and the estimated house payment. According to the bottom line, they would have almost $900 left each month. It looked tight but not impossible until I noticed that several costs were low. Utilities for a 4-bedroom house were estimated at less than I paid for my ranch. Home maintenance was listed as 0. So were medical expenses, clothing, gifts, and travel. The grocery number belonged to 2 people who never ate outside the house, which did not describe Ethan and Jenna. I emailed back a short list of questions. Jenna responded, "We can adjust after we move in. The important thing is getting into the market." On Saturday morning, they came to my house without calling. Ethan carried coffee. Jenna carried another printout. For nearly an hour, they tried every version of the same argument. Property values would rise. Their salaries would rise. Rent was throwing money away. They needed room for future children. The development had a pool. The seller had chosen them over another buyer. They had already told friends. That last reason seemed to matter more than either wanted to admit. Then Ethan showed me a refinance illustration. After 24 months, we take you off. You're exposed for 2 years. Maximum. That paper assumes the house appreciates. Rates cooperate. And your debt goes down. I said. All reasonable assumptions. Jenna replied. Assumptions aren't promises. She looked at me as if I were using caution to punish them. My parents would do this if they could. Jenna's parents were kind people. But her father had been out of work after back surgery, and they were carrying debt of their own. I didn't criticize them. I only said, then you understand why financial security matters. Ethan's face changed. So that's it, you're just saying no. I'm saying I will not cosign. I can give you $10,000 toward a down payment or closing costs. It would be a gift, documented properly, for the lender. That is what I can offer without risking my retirement. I had planned to offer 12, but the way they had approached me made me keep a firmer reserve. 10,000 was still meaningful money to me. It represented months of disciplined saving. Jenna gave a short laugh with no humor in it. 10,000 doesn't fix the income requirement. Then the house is too expensive. She stood and gathered the papers. Ethan remained seated. You could do this, he said quietly. You're choosing not to. That sentence stayed with me after they left. On Monday, I barely slept. Part of me kept searching for a safe version of yes. Maybe a written agreement between us. Maybe automatic transfers. Maybe they could sell one car. But none of those changed the lender's position. A private promise from my son would not remove my responsibility for the loan. At work, one of my technicians found me staring at the same maintenance report 10 minutes after I had signed it. I went outside and sat in my truck through lunch. I hated that protecting myself felt like abandoning him. That night, I found a blue folder on the chair by my front door. Jenna must have set it there when they gathered their things Saturday. I texted Ethan that I had it. Before closing it, I checked for anything I needed to return with it. Inside was a different budget. This one was labeled, First 24 months. The mortgage payment was the same, but beside it were 3 contribution columns: Ethan, Jenna, and Dad, under my name. They had entered $900 a month for the first year, and $600 a month for the second. There was also a note: Dad can cover emergency repairs until refinance. Below that was a furniture plan. New sectional, dining set, patio furniture, guest bedroom. Most of it was to be financed after closing. I sat at my kitchen table and read the page twice. They had told me I would never make a payment. Their private budget required more than $17,000 from me over 2 years, beyond the down payment help, and left me responsible for repairs they couldn't absorb. They hadn't asked because they expected the request to become easier after I was already liable. I photographed the page, put it back, and called Ethan. I found your blue folder. Great. I've been looking for that. I saw the 2-year budget. Silence. Then he said, that was a draft. It assigns me part of your mortgage. Only at the beginning. We were going to talk to you about it. When? He didn't answer. Jenna took the phone. We didn't know what you'd be comfortable contributing, so we put in a placeholder. A placeholder has a question mark. This has monthly amounts. Families help each other. Daniel. Yes. They also ask. I told them my answer was final. The $10,000 gift remained available if they bought a home they could qualify for and carry themselves. I would not provide monthly payments, emergency repair money, or a signature. Ethan accused me of going through their private papers. He wasn't entirely wrong. The folder had been left in my home, but I had opened pages that weren't mine. I apologized for reading it. I did not apologize for what it showed. By Wednesday, the argument had spread. My ex-wife, Laura, called from Arizona. Ethan had told her I was causing them to lose the house after promising to cosign. Did you promise? She asked. No. Are you sure you didn't imply it? I told her about the dinner and the budget. She sighed. He didn't mention any of that. Laura didn't immediately take my side. She thought I might cosign if Ethan agreed to sell his truck, and they delayed buying furniture. That was exactly how family pressure worked. Everyone offered conditions for a risk that would belong only to me. Would you sign the loan? I asked. I can't. That wasn't my question. After a pause, she said, "No, I wouldn't." The next day, she called Ethan and told him to stop saying I had broken a promise. It didn't repair anything, but it removed one place he could send the blame. Meanwhile, Melissa, the realtor, asked them to decide whether to amend or withdraw the offer before their financing contingency expired. Priya gave them a realistic purchase range based on their verified income and debts. It was more than $100,000 below the house they had chosen. They tried another lender. The answer was similar. Jenna asked her mother whether an uncle might co-sign. Her mother refused to pass along the request. That part came to me later, after feelings cooled. At the time, all I knew was that Ethan stopped calling. On the final afternoon, he sent me a message. "If you sign today, we can still save it." I stared at the words during my break. My hands were shaking, which irritated me because nothing about the decision had changed. I typed 3 different replies and erased them all. Finally, I wrote, "I love you. My answer is no. The gift is still available when you choose a house you can afford without me." They withdrew under the financing contingency. Their earnest money was returned, but they lost the inspection fee and the money they had paid for an appraisal. More painfully, they had to tell their friends that the deal had fallen through. For almost 6 weeks, Ethan and I didn't speak. I didn't chase him. I mailed his blue folder back and continued my normal routine. I worked, mowed the lawn, and met an old friend for breakfast on Sundays. The quiet wasn't peaceful. Every time my phone lit up, I hoped it was him and resented myself for hoping. Then, in early November, he called because the battery in Jenna's car had died near my side of town. He didn't ask me for money. He asked whether I had jumper cables. I drove over. We worked beside the car in a grocery store parking lot. For 10 minutes, we spoke only about the battery. When the engine finally started, Ethan closed the hood and wiped his hands on his jeans. Priya gave us a plan. He said they had paid off a credit card, sold his expensive truck, and replaced it with a used sedan. Jenna had stopped shopping listings based on future raises. They were looking at townhouses and older ranch homes in 3 neighborhoods farther from the development they had wanted. "That sounds sensible," I said. He nodded, but he still looked angry. "It doesn't feel like moving forward." "It will when it belongs to you." He didn't answer, yet he didn't walk away either. 3 months later, they invited me to see a 2-bedroom townhouse. It had a narrow kitchen, 1-car garage, small fenced patio, and a water stain beneath an upstairs window. It was not impressive. It was also within the range they could qualify for on their own. Ethan asked what I thought of the stain. For the first time in the entire process, he was asking for the kind of help I knew how to give. I told him it could be old flashing or a window seal, but they needed the inspector to check for active moisture. I looked at the furnace, the electrical panel, and the grating outside. I didn't tell them whether to buy it. I gave them information and let the decision remain theirs. Their offer was accepted. I gave them the $10,000 through the documented gift process Priya required. They used most of it for closing costs and kept the rest as a repair reserve. No new furniture went on credit. Jenna's parents gave them their old dining table 2 weeks after closing. The upstairs window leaked during a hard rain. Ethan called, frustrated but not panicked. He had money set aside. He got 2 estimates, chose a contractor, and paid the bill himself. That repair did more for him than any lecture I could have given. The problem was his. The decision was his. And when it was finished, so was the satisfaction. Our relationship didn't snap back to normal. Jenna apologized first. She told me that she had been ashamed of buying a smaller place after months of showing people the development online. She had convinced herself that because I had more, asking me to carry the risk wasn't really taking anything from me. Ethan's apology came later. He admitted that he had used my old promise to help as permission to avoid hearing no. He also admitted the monthly contribution was not a placeholder. They had planned to ask after I signed because they thought I would feel too invested to refuse. That admission hurt, but it also ended the last argument between us. He finally named what he had done instead of calling it paperwork. Today, they have been in the townhouse for a little over a year. Jenna turned the 2nd bedroom into an office. and they decided there was no reason to rush into a larger place before they actually needed one. Ethan has rebuilt part of his savings. He still drives the used sedan. I paid off the final balance on my own house last spring. On the evening, the confirmation arrived. I sat on my back steps with a cup of coffee and listened to rain move through the maple tree. No one else's payment was attached to my name. My retirement account was still mine. My credit was intact. And my son owned a home he could keep without borrowing my future. I had helped him after all. I just refused to let help mean surrender. If your adult child had already promised your signature and planned your payments without asking, would you still co-sign to save their dream house?